Almost exactly 1 year ago, I made a video on Ethena outlining the risks to the protocol that I thought at the time would cause the protocol to fail. Obviously, Ethena has not failed, and the market cap of their main stablecoin, USDe, has more than doubled since I made that video. Ethena has made a lot of big announcements since then and made a lot of changes, so I wanted to make this video to tell you if I still think that Ethena is doomed to fail. Of course, everything in this video is for informational purposes only and is not meant to be construed as financial advice. In the last video, I outlined 3 specific risks to Ethena: funding rate risk, liquidity risk, and counterparty risk. In this video, I'm going to go through each of those risks and see how Ethena handled them over the last 12 months. And most importantly, I'm going to tell you if these are still existential risks for Ethena today. The first and biggest risk that I talked about in my last video was the funding rate risk. You see, Ethena's entire premise was that they were going to be the tool for users to capture the high funding rate yields that were happening around 12 months ago. Funding rates for Ethereum had consistently been above 10% and almost always been positive for the entirety of Ethereum's history. My prediction was that just because funding rates hadn't been negative historically, that didn't mean that they wouldn't be negative in the future. And if you look at this ETH funding rate history chart, you can see that I was absolutely right. There have been many periods of negative Ethereum funding rates, and in general, the yield has dropped from 10, 20, 30% before a year ago to barely positive today. So if I was right about funding rates, why did the second part of my prediction, that users would pull their money from Ethena, not happen? And basically the answer is Ethena changed a core part of their protocol. They partnered with Securitize to launch a different stablecoin product, different than USDe, called USDtb. I can only assume that the TB stands for treasury bills because this coin is a simple wrapper around BlackRock's yield-bearing stablecoin. That BlackRock stablecoin, called BUILD, is exclusively invested in US treasuries, which are currently yielding anywhere from 4 to 5%. Previously, when there were negative funding rate days, Ethena would just lose money on their USDe tokens. But now, when there's negative funding rates, they just shift part of their portfolio over to this stablecoin backed by treasury bills. And you can see from Ethena's website that in the last month, over 34% of days had negative funding rates. At the time of recording my last video, this would have meant that users and the protocol were actually losing money every single one of those days. But because of this change, instead of losing money, they just shift a big part of their portfolio over to this treasury-backed stablecoin. If you look at the Ethena holdings dashboard, they have around 75% of their holdings in this treasury-backed stablecoin right now. This is why the yields from staking USDe have gone way lower over the last 12 months. From their own chart, you can see that it basically tracks 30-day US treasuries, and on some days, it even goes below them. This update to the protocol has dramatically lowered Ethena's risk profile. Before, it was a niche product aimed at taking advantage of the super high funding rates at the time, but one that could also blow up if funding rates went negative. Now it has the same risk profile of basically every other treasury-backed stablecoin, with the added benefit that sometimes when funding rates get high, it'll shift resources there to take advantage of them. The other 2 risks I talked about were liquidity risk and counterparty risk. The liquidity risk part had to do with Ethena's stablecoin being integrated into a bunch of other different protocols. The bad news is that those integrations have only gotten bigger and bigger, and much more of the DeFi ecosystem is using USDe. But the good news is that because the risk profile is so much lower now, these liquidation cascades are much less likely to happen. The final risk I outlined in that original video was counterparty risk. And in regards to that risk, there was actually a big scare of Ethena that happened during the Bybit hack. Bybit, who is Ethena's biggest custodian, had a core wallet drained for over $1 billion. Almost immediately, USDe lost its peg and people started pulling their money from the protocol. But a couple of things happened that prevented a collapse. First of all, within 2 hours, Ethena was able to realize $30 million of unrealized profit that they had on Bybit. And within 3 hours, they were able to move the $400 million in hedges that they had off of Bybit. Over this time, people were trying to get out of Ethena's stablecoin, and Ethena processed over $120 million of redemptions without fail. So this was a great stress test for the Ethena team that shows that they are ready to act quickly in the case that one of their custodians has some trouble. But one thing to keep in mind is that this wasn't a true test. That's because Bybit never paused withdrawals and made all of their customers whole by eating the loss themselves. This means that nobody had any trouble pulling their money out of Bybit during the time, and Bybit processed withdrawals normally during the entire hack. So that leaves an open question. What if the hack was just a little bit worse and Bybit paused all withdrawals? Even with things working normally, USDe still depegged from $1. If their positions on Bybit had actually been frozen and there was a big movement in the price of Bitcoin or ETH, then who knows what would have happened if the peg lowered to the point where liquidation cascades started happening. That's why, to me, counterparty risk is now the biggest risk, and you still have to keep that in mind if you're going to use Ethena, especially if you're going to use Ethena with any kind of leverage that relies on the underlying stablecoin maintaining its peg. But the good news is that the funding rate risk, which was really the biggest risk in this whole thing, has pretty much been solved. And while there still are some risks, I am much less worried about a Ethena crash than I was before, because USDe is looking a lot more like a vanilla stablecoin. So credit where credit is due. Nice work to the Ethena team to patch the biggest risk in their protocol. They've also been executing at a high level, planning on launching their own chain and their own perpetual exchange. Hope you like the update. Let me know if you think Ethena is less risky now, and I'll see you in the next video.